Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our May webinar. Appreciate you all being here. We have what is an updated webinar on Microsoft Teams, and we'll be jumping into that as I'm sure other people are going to be joining us here shortly. I'm Jeremy Cherney. I'm owner of Tobin Solutions and excited to be here with you today to talk about Microsoft Teams. And um, Teams is kind of a big application with lots of features and functions, and it's maybe a misunderstood application. So today we'd like to, if you're new to Teams, to introduce you to what it is. If you've been using it for a bit, introduce you to some of the new features that are out there, some different ways you can use it and implement it. Um, I was thinking about this earlier. It's kind of like, if I gave you a hammer and you knew how to use a hammer, that may mean you can wield the hammer in different ways, but it may or may not mean you can kind of build a house with it. Maybe you're one of those people that can. Maybe if you got a plan to a house and a hammer, you could maybe build it, but maybe not. So the reason I bring that up is Teams is complex, and if you kind of jump into it without knowing what you're doing, you can maybe get a little lost with it, maybe set yourself up for some security issues, maybe not get the benefits of it and give up on it, which for us is kind of the worst case scenario. Well, I guess the security event would be a really worst case scenario, but really, so um, it's a very powerful tool, and a lot of you have it by default, and we'll get into that. So, but as we're going through this, think about different ways you can use it. Maybe pick a problem you've got in your business. Maybe let some things percolate here as we go through, and really just maybe you've been using Teams, maybe you've kind of got this webinar on in the background and while you're doing something else, which is all fine, and but maybe you listen newly. Maybe there's something you're going to pick up here that's going to make Teams be something you want to start using more of. We're also going to talk a little bit about planning and next steps, because that's important, to for us and probably for you all, to make sure that if you're going to be using it, that you're using it the right way, the best way, one of the best ways, so that it can actually make the difference that you want it to make at your company. Along the way, if you've got some questions, and feel free to ask in the chat, and I'll answer those. I'll also be around at the end for a bit if I plan my timing right here for any questions. Um, So some of you may not have Microsoft 365 already. I think a lot of you do. But just as a background, what Microsoft 365, that's Microsoft's cloud hosting, cloud services for all of their products that they have. And there's different packages available. All these basic packages that we list here, with the exception of apps for business, include Microsoft Teams. So if you've got Business Basic, Business Standard, Business Premium, you've got Microsoft Teams. If you have apps for business, you don't have Microsoft Teams, and you'd have to add that on. Microsoft also recently changed some of their licensing due to, I think the European Union had some, I don't know if it was antitrust or something like that, where they wanted Microsoft to unbundle Teams from their standard offerings. So there's actually versions of Business Basic, Business Standard, and Business Premium that don't include Teams, and they're a little bit less money. So if you come out of this and you're like, we will never ever use Teams again, the next time you renew your Microsoft 365, you could save a couple of bucks per user if you're not going to use that anymore. If you want to drop down to the version without Teams. Why we're here, Microsoft hosts Teams for you, and there's plenty of things online to figure out how to use Teams and all that, but we're here is to help with security. We're here to help with training, support on it, setup administration. We'll get into shared responsibilities, what that means a little bit later on, but really, how you use these tools. What problem are you trying to solve? What's your strategy around Teams? What about the data and integration with it? So we like to think we're your Swiss Army knife around that. And, I love that image because it's the right tool for the right job. You can undo a screw with, the knife part of the Swiss Army knife, but really using the screwdriver part of it, the Phillips or the flathead is actually the better method. So, that's really an important part of that. We see that happen a lot where people jump ahead and with any application and it doesn't do what they need and end up giving up on it. And it's kind of a sad situation. So we don't want to see that happen. Um, so when I talk about getting the most from teams as we're going through here, I got a little different maxims and sayings here that we all have in life. Uh, but it's really important when it comes to any kind of IT implementation. You see people using, the wrong tool for the job in IT sometimes, and that leads to frustration or missed opportunities. So you want to really look here when you're using Teams, is it the right tool for the right job? When you're planning it out, you want to begin with the end in mind. Be prepared, look before you leap. These are kind of cutesy, but we all know what it's like when we don't do these things. We kind of jump in and sometimes we don't get the result we want, which leads to frustration, giving up, wasted time, and wasted money. So as you're going in here, you may want to jump in and you're probably going to be pretty prepared to jump in and start getting to use Teams. And that's great. And that's, what we want. And before you get too far with it, you want to be clear where you're headed with it. Because once you start customizing it and changing teams, it's not always easy to unwind or to redo what you do there. So begin with the end in mind and work with an expert that'll help you get where you want to be. So what is Microsoft Teams? It is, according to Microsoft, a unified communication and collaboration platform that combines persistent workplace chat, video meetings, file storage, including collaboration on files, and application integration. So what does all that mean? What that means really is Teams is kind of a platform unto itself. With Teams, it's got these features built in for talking and chatting and sharing and all that. But for some people, if all you use is Microsoft applications, you could literally do your entire job all inside of Microsoft Teams. You can, see your calendar, you can do emails, you can do chats. I mean, all these kinds of pieces in there. And so it's complex in that way, and it's misunderstood in some ways around that. But it's a really powerful tool, and you may find different uses for it in your organization. And we'll be sharing some of those different ways it can be used, and we'll go into that. One of the things that's important about Teams you want to get is that there's full mobility with it. So it doesn't just exist as a desktop application. You can also use it from a web browser if you need to. It's got a Teams version for your iPhone and for your Android phone, and you get a lot of the similar experience all the way through. And so it's, you're kind of meeting your people where they are. If you've got somebody that works in the warehouse and they don't have, a computer on them at all times, you could actually use Teams off a phone or a tablet that they can carry with them and do a lot of what you want to have done through that. Microsoft refers to those people sometimes as frontline workers. It could be somebody at the front office. It could be on the road salespeople. There's just so many different ways that, with Teams and that mobility that you can give people access to the whole Teams experience. And that's an important piece because that mobility is big these days. It used to be if you want to get access to a file, you'd have to, come in through a VPN or remote desktop or go into the office to access those documents. Now, if you manage them and use them through Teams, people can get access to those documents anywhere. There's other things you're going to see, apps that you can put into Teams, and those all become available from people on the road and wherever they are. So as you start percolating ideas for how this could be used, don't limit yourself to thinking, oh, I can't give it to this person because they don't have a computer at their desk, or it's a warehouse worker and they don't have a full computer. They just have email. Start to expand the thinking about what's possible because this full mobility makes it possible in almost every situation you want. So let's get in a little bit about how Teams is organized. So Teams has kind of two concepts here. It's got what are called teams and what are called channels. I've got a screenshot here of Teams, and one of the things you'll find out with Microsoft Teams, as well as most Microsoft products, and really, frankly, almost any product these days, whether it's an app or anything you use, the interface and how things look and where they put things on the screen is changing at a kind of a breakneck speed. It's frustrating sometimes for people. Where did they put this? There's a new update. Suddenly your things aren't where they are. But a lot of times the core concepts are the same, but sometimes, what I'm showing you here may not exactly match what you have, but it's pretty close. So, but if you get unclear about that or you want to check in, we've got, support around that. So when you organize in Microsoft Teams, there is what are called the Teams concept. So the team it's that group of people that work together. It could be a department. It could be your whole company. You could set up a team just around a specific project. There's different ways to organize this, and it's an important thing to understand because you can create lots and lots of teams, and if you're not careful, you can create so many teams that it gets confusing for people, or they're not sure where to go to find their information. So this is another thing of where you want to, begin with the end in mind. Do you want to do a team around your departments? Do you want to do a team around specific working groups? Do you have a specific project you want to do it for? And there might also be security reasons why you might want to set teams for different reasons. So, but that is the core concept. And really with teams, you can just use one team. By default, you get a basic team out of the box, and you can just use that one team. There's no reason to create more, but there might be reasons, and that's an important thing before you start cramming teams full of information. Within a team, you have what are called channels. So, a channel could be that specific area. It could be for one component. It could be for a specific project. It could be for a department. So you could have one team being ABC company is your team, and then each channel could be, one channel could be sales, one channel could be finance, one channel could be admin. If you're got projects, one channel could be project A, one channel could be project B, one channel could be project C. The idea of this is to let you further organize and manage the information you've got in Microsoft Teams. So these are some core concepts. The channels is where, when you're chatting and doing announcements and putting in documents and things like that, updates and finding information, is where that really happens inside those channels. So what's important is that you have those designed the way you want. By default, you'll get a basic team, so if you're company ABC, it'll create the company ABC team. And you can see on the channel in the box there, you can see the very first one is called general. That creates the very first channel you have. It's just a general channel. But you might want to add others here. For example, for this one, they've got a project team and they've got the general, but they also have a design channel, digital assets, go-to-market plan, research and development. And the idea is to kind of help you control and organize your information in a way that makes sense rather than putting it all in one big bucket. I'm going to start with a poll here before we get too far. What are some of the features that you might be already using with Teams? Take a look at that poll, and what are you doing with it now? A lot of video conferencing. File sharing. Anybody else want to put their name in the poll? Go ahead. We'll close it out here in just a couple seconds. All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. So here we have the results of the poll. So a lot of you look like you're using for video conferencing, chatting, file sharing, and a few of you are using integration with other apps and some task management. So that's pretty expected. I think that pretty seems to make sense to me what people have got there. So Mickey, you're asking about was showing us how to add channels. Yeah, just right click on a team and say add a channel. We're not going to do too much of the live demo here. I'm kind of going into the specific features here, but yeah, right click on your team and just say add a channel. Pretty straightforward. Thank you for the question. So one of the biggest things people do, good, is chatting, right? So what I've got here is a screenshot of a chat inside a channel. And in and it looks pretty straightforward, right? I mean, chatting is one of those things, there's how Teams does it, but most of us are pretty familiar with chatting on our phones, or in some cases chatting through Teams or Zoom or Facebook, or all those different kinds of things where we're kind of going back and forth on. Teams has three different kinds of chats. One is that one-to-one chat. So it could be me just chatting with one other person in my organization or outside my organization. You've got group chats where you can have it with multiple people at the same time. And then you have also chats that are within a meeting. So if you do a meeting inside of Teams, you start that. Inside that meeting, you'll also have the ability to chat and have that as part of stored with the meeting. And you can do all the basic functions in chat. You can type things out. It's got fancy formatting. If you look at the bottom underneath where it shows start a new conversation here, you've got some icons for formatting. So you can pretty it up and use different colors and different fonts if you want. You can add emojis and GIFs and other things like that. So it's pretty powerful from that perspective. You can like something or heart something or any of those kinds of things. So again, it works. Most of us are pretty familiar with the kind of general chat features that exist in almost every application today, and Microsoft keeps it along those same lines. But one of those things you want to see here is, a lot of you are already chatting. And part of this is to webinars to explain, why you might want to use Teams over some of the other tools you're using right now. So if you are, maybe you're already, let's say you've got your team out there and you're using just your regular cell phone. You got iMessage or whatever, however you're chatting, you're using the standard phone chat, the SMS texting kind of a thing. That works. But there's some limitations that Teams gets over with that we really think are reasons why it would make sense to move away from texting with your team and start using Teams chat. First of all, it's your data. Sometimes you're chatting, hey, are you coming? Are you not? Are you, where are you? Let's meet for lunch, that kind of thing. But there could be confidential information in there. There could be business critical information in those chats. And if somebody leaves your organization or anything like that, you have no control over what they do with those messages. You can't reclaim those. It's in their chat, it's in their own texting. So you want to think about what kind of data are you going to be texting people back and forth, and try and keep it inside of Teams, because now you have some control over that data. You don't lose it if they leave the organization. It's also your chat history. So you could be chatting about something that's out there for a long time, but when you add somebody new to the chat, depending on what they've got, you can actually, with Teams, you can say, when you add somebody new to the chat, like let's say you've got a sales chat that you're using in your organization, and now you hire a new salesperson. When you add them to that new sales chat, you can say, do you want to include all the prior history? And so if they want to scroll back and see what you've been chatting about in the sales history, they can get access to that. If you don't think you want them to have access to that, you can just say, nope, they can just start with what's new. So you get some control there. Someone's asking about notifications. Yep, you can get notifications of the chat that they can get an alert, they can get an email that they've got a new chat. You can have the notification features of Teams pop up and let you know there's something new in the chat as well. You also get presence awareness. You get this if you're strictly like using one platform like iMessage. You can tell whether people are online or not sometimes if they allow that. With Teams, you can also include that. Presence awareness means you can see, are they listed as green, meaning they're online. You'll get next to the person's name. If I go back to this screen, you can see, like under Megan Brown, next to her emote, next to her icon, there's a little red dot. That means that they are maybe in a meeting or they're not considered available. You also get yellow, meaning that they might have stepped away for a little bit, or you get green, meaning they're online. So you get that presence awareness, which is really powerful, especially if you're working with remote users. It's one thing if they're over the, divider in your cubicles or something like that, you can kind of know if they're there or not. But with Teams, you can actually know whether they're online and available. The other thing you get are a status message. So if somebody is out of, they're in a meeting, they can set that as a status message. So when you go into Teams, you can see, oh, they stepped out for lunch, or you can see that, they'll be right back, or that they're working from another location. So you actually get information about where they're at without them having to do this. And it also works, if you're connected with Teams and you're using it from your phone, it also works over Wi-Fi, and not all texting works over Wi-Fi. So we recommend using Teams for that because you're going to get those capabilities. It's kind of a security concern. That's that part of it. Your data, as well as those additional features you get, regardless of whether they're using an Android or iPhone, you'll get those same kind of features that are available. You can do video conferencing with Teams. So a lot of you are using that. You can create an instant video conference. So if you're just talking somebody one-to-one, you can just click on their name and just, ring them up. You can start doing that. If you got a camera, obviously is needed. You can start doing the video conferencing. You can do audio conferencing through this, so you can do it either way. But you can also invite guests. So if you want to do an outside meeting with somebody and include them, you can do that. You can record meetings. You can also do transcriptions of meetings. So it'll actually transcribe what was being said for the meeting and attach it to the meeting. So it's really powerful that way. And that's something you don't always get if you're using, FaceTime or one of those other applications off your phone. So it's really powerful that way, and it's super easy to set up. And looks like David was saying something about messages. They had to stop using it because of the gaps. Yeah, that's the other thing. With sometimes that happens with, if you're referring to what I refer to or what I'm thinking of with those messaging, sometimes they don't get the message for some reason. It doesn't show up. That stuff is not always guaranteed to get through on your phone, whereas with Teams, it'll stay all inside the chat. So you might want to start thinking, where you could be using voice and video conferencing for people, either inside your organization or with your customers or partners or anybody else. You also can see your calendar inside of Teams. So if you open up Teams and you look at the calendar icon on the left, it'll actually show you what's in your calendar. So again, I talk about that one platform. If you're talking to somebody, you want to set up an appointment, you can actually do it right inside of Teams. Or a little picture at the top, if you're in Microsoft Outlook, when you go create a meeting, you can actually say, do you want to do a new Teams meeting? And what'll happen is when you set up the meeting in Outlook, it'll automatically create a link to a Teams link for you so that people can click on that and go right into the meeting. Also, in some cases, if you've got it turned on, that presence awareness is smart enough that if you go into a meeting, it'll automatically set your presence to busy. So if someone's trying to chat with you, they'll see that you're red for your RED red, that you're not available because you might be in a meeting. So you can do it either way, and then you can just open them up right from inside of Teams, or you can do it right from Outlook. So another powerful way to set up those meetings. Teams has guest access. What do we mean by that? So, you might, if you're already using, video conferencing with clients and you're using Teams for that, that's pretty straightforward to invite people as a guest. However, you can actually set up Teams with guest access to your environment. And this is again where it becomes important of how you set up those teams and channels. But if you want, if you've got, say, a business partner or a client you're working with, and you have, say, a Teams channel set up for a project you're working on with that client, you can invite them to go in and see what you've got in Teams there. You can have files that they can be shared there. You can chat with them. You can do updates. And they don't need Microsoft 365 at all. They just need the Teams application or a web browser to get into it. But again, there could be some security concerns. So you want to make sure if you're doing it correctly so you don't accidentally give a guest access to everything you have. But it's a real powerful feature. Instead of emailing clients back and forth about a project, if you've got alignment to use Teams, you can be using all of these features and functions with them to coordinate, communicate, share, and work together without having to do the email dance of emailing documents back and forth, constantly going back and forth with emails, and then managing all of those emails, and then putting those, deleting those emails that you don't need and saving the ones that you do need because they're project related. If you give them access to Teams and you do it the right way, they'll have access to just that project or just that solution, and you can do it all within Teams. So another powerful feature that Microsoft gives that to you for included with your license. So let's talk about documents in Teams. And this is definitely want you to listen up on this one because there's a lot of misunderstanding about where your documents are and how you work with documents. So there's a couple of things you can do. When you're chatting with somebody, you can click on the paperclip, or in some cases, I think they changed the paperclip now, it's just a plus sign. And you can upload a file, you can browse other Teams channels, you can grab things from your OneDrive, you can upload from your computer if you had a PDF or something like that, and you can just click and add it into Teams and put it into that chat. And that's nice because you can say, hey, here's this document, and now you're chatting around the document rather than emailing it back and forth with updates. If you have it linked to a document that is sorry about that. If you have a document that is stored in Teams, and we'll talk about what that means in a second, you don't have to keep emailing the document back and forth for people. If you've got a document set up, you can edit the document live inside of Teams without having to email it back and forth. Another powerful feature, especially if you're working with any people outside your organization. So let's talk about the distinction here. So Microsoft has two products. One is called Microsoft SharePoint, and one is called Microsoft Teams. SharePoint is primarily used for document management, and it's also an intranet platform where you can put other kinds of information, share information, and things like that. Teams is that hub, it's that platform, it's that, it's where you can collaborate, chat, but it actually doesn't store that stuff inside of Teams. And that's where a lot of people kind of get hung up is, where is my document? Oh, is it in Teams? Is it in SharePoint? So let's look at that. So when you create a new team, by default, in the background, Microsoft does a bunch of stuff for you. So first of all, it creates a Microsoft 365 group. So if you create a new team called, the marketing team, it's going to create a Microsoft 365 group called the marketing group. And it does that for security purposes, because you may want to have a team or a channel that's set up for everyone to use in your organization, or you might want to restrict it. This could be like, let's say it's a finance team you set up. You may not want your entire company to have access to the finance team or the finance channel. So in the background, it creates that group, and that helps dictate the security. But also, look, it creates a SharePoint site for you. So if you create a new group called marketing, it's going to create a new SharePoint site called marketing. It also creates a shared mailbox and a shared calendar by default. So every team site you have has that show up in Exchange. It also gives you a OneNote notebook, which, if you're not familiar with OneNote, is a great application for storing documents and creating documents and procedure manuals and things like that. And if you have other services, like by default, it might create something in Microsoft Planner, their task-based management planning application, project management application. So as you can see from above, when you do this, a SharePoint site is created, and that is where your documents are actually getting stored. So when you share a file in Teams, they're stored in the associated site in SharePoint, not in Microsoft Teams. You see them from Teams. Remember, this is where it gets a little funky, where you start to think about how Teams operates, and why I talk about it being a platform. It's not actually stored in SharePoint, those documents, but you can access those documents from Teams and get at SharePoint from Teams. So you're kind of reaching through Teams to get at those documents that you've got in SharePoint. Clear as mud? So, but it's an important concept because for both security, for searching, as well as just finding your docs and that kind of a thing. So here's kind of what it looks like. So in Teams, here you can see we've got a marketing team, and underneath it's got the general folder, and there's a document called Microsoft 365 Community Docs. You're seeing that as a file in Teams, but where it really is stored is this. If you look below, this is a web browser of what's in the marketing SharePoint site. And I'm looking at the documents inside of marketing, and you can see inside of every Microsoft SharePoint site, by default, it creates a documents section. And then underneath that, it creates a general folder. So we talked about how every time you get a team, it creates a default channel called general. You can see how these match up. So you've got the marketing team with the general channel. Here you've got below, you've got the marketing SharePoint site that it automatically created. And underneath the document section, it created a folder called general. And that's really where that Microsoft 365 Community Docs file exists. So while you're seeing it through Teams, it's actually being stored, the permissions that are available, how you manage it, all of that is actually happening in SharePoint. So hopefully that kind of clears it up for people. So whether I go into SharePoint and edit that Microsoft 365 Community Docs file, or whether I go into Teams and open it up and work with it there, it's the same file. It's the exact same file. Someone's asking about file size limitations. There are some limitations, and I don't remember what they are offhand. I think depending on what you're looking for, it can handle pretty large files. I think SharePoint, and it's really becomes a SharePoint limitation in terms of how large of a file SharePoint can store. And I think SharePoint can store files up to 2 gigs now, maybe 2 gigabytes. But in reality, most of your documents are going to be a lot smaller than that. But I'm not totally clear on that, so don't take that as gospel. We can get back to you on that if you need. But most of the documents you use, the big PDFs, that's another thing, right? When you're trying to email documents back and forth, a lot of systems put limitations on emailing documents, up to 10 meg or 20 meg. Here, you can access and use these documents from Teams without having to worry about mailing them back and forth. And you'll have much larger file sizes. That's a good question. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit for you and where those documents are. But it's really an important distinction because people look for these and they're just not finding their documents sometimes, or really getting confused. Or one person says, I got it in SharePoint. Another person says, well, I got it through Teams. And guess what? They're both right because it's the same document. But for training purposes for your team, not your Microsoft team, but for your team at work, how do you want them to access these files? What is the training you're going to provide for them so that people are doing it the right way and not getting frustrated? Thank you, Amanda. SharePoint size 250 gigabytes. Mickey, you're asking about where does OneDrive fit in? So We have a whole other webinar on SharePoint and storing documents in SharePoint versus OneDrive and some of the benefits and where you would do that. From Teams perspective, if you attach a document from your OneDrive, it'll link to what's in your OneDrive. So it's kind of the same concept that you might see it in Teams, but it's really referencing what's in OneDrive for you. But there's reasons why you might want to put things in OneDrive versus inside of SharePoint, and that's maybe a bit of a different webinar or a follow-up question. But conceptually, from Teams perspective, if you put something in from OneDrive, it's stored in OneDrive and it links to OneDrive from inside of Teams. It's not stored in Teams. Same thing. Pros and cons, David, that's a whole other webinar. There's definitely pros and cons. You can find that on the on our YouTube channel. We've got a SharePoint and OneDrive video, or if you want to have a follow-up conversation, we can talk about that because there's definitely pros and cons of both, especially around security and sharing. So this is kind of a cool feature that Teams has that not everybody knows about, and that is for every channel you've got, it includes an email address by default. So if you right-click on a channel and you say get email address, it'll then pop up another screen that says here's an email address, and that stays with the channel. So what does that mean? That means you can do different things. You can email stuff from Outlook or forward something from Outlook to that email address that's attached to that channel, and it will show up inside of that channel, inside of Teams. Now that's a pretty cool thing because sometimes what you're dealing with is, oh, I just got an email from a client. What are we going to do with this email? Or maybe it's a email about a new project. And instead of emailing that out to your sales team and then going back and forth with email, you could have your business development pipeline channel like is showing in this screenshot, and something new comes in. So there it is. You can email something right into it, and now you can start chatting about that email inside of Teams instead of going back and forth with emails in Outlook. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing it in Outlook, but again, this gets to the right tool for the right job. It's easy to do it in Outlook, but it creates a lot of emails. And sometimes those emails don't have the most current information. People have to figure out the current status. Sometimes you've got documents going back and forth in those emails, and it really just adds a lot of clutter and confusion sometimes. So here you can take it from email and get it right into Teams so that your team can start working with it. You could also have an email address that you give to your clients. Like if they had a project and you had and you were using a channel for a project, anytime they email about that project, you can say, hey, you can email me, email it to my address, but also CC this email address, or just send it to this email address. And every time you do that, it'll automatically drop that email right into Teams. So it's immensely powerful from that perspective. And it's another way of getting information and getting it out of what might be a less effective tool and getting into something like Teams where you can manage it a little more tightly. So that's a pretty cool feature. Searching. So at the top of your Microsoft Teams, you have the command box. And from there, you can actually do some commands to manage Teams, but it's also just a global search functionality. So as soon as you start typing in something like, in this case, proposal, it brings up the messages, the people, and the files that match where it sees proposal. And you can see here it brought up some documents that you had. And if you look, you can see where some of those documents are under shared documents. Those are in, where are those documents? In Microsoft Teams. I'm sorry, in SharePoint. Or they could be in your OneDrive. It could even find things that you've got stored in your email as attachments. It's an immensely powerful search functionality. And here's what you want to know about the searching is, it's not just searching what's in Teams. It searches everything you have in Microsoft Office 365. So this is where security gets important. So when you're searching, it's powerful. It searches everything you've got, but if you don't have your security set up properly and you've got, you think you've got a document library or a OneDrive file or whatever it is that is uh, not properly secured, meaning it's not limited to the people that need access to it, and you've got it set to everyone in your organization, then when they search, they're going to find everything. I mean, literally, that search is very powerful. It searches everything you've got in Microsoft 365, and it's all connected, which is really great. And it also is very powerful, and it's also kind of a risk. So we talked about the risk of security. The powerful piece is it searches everything. So if you've got stuff and it's not organized well, it might find things that you've got set out there as old documents that you don't even want anybody to see anymore, that aren't relevant. It could be old versions of things. It'll find it all. So when you're putting things up in SharePoint or in other places in Microsoft 365, it's important to kind of do it, in quotes, the right way, so that you're not putting in too much data that people are not going to find, or that people will find that you don't want them to find, or exposing to things you don't want them to have access to. So it's super powerful, and that leads to the shared responsibility. So this is when you sign up for Microsoft 365 or pretty much any product these days, you click, next, next, next on that terms of service, on that end user license agreement. When you do that with Microsoft 365, you are automatically saying you are now responsible for all your information and data. You're responsible for all your endpoint devices. You're responsible for all your accounts and identities, all those IDs and passwords you have, as well as partially responsible for that whole directory infrastructure for how those accounts get created. So this is why it's important where I talk about that searching is, what are you going to do with all that data? Is it set up the way you want? Is it protected the way you want? If you give someone guest access to your team's environment, are you giving them access to just their project, or are you giving them access to the whole enchilada? So this is an important thing to be thinking about as you go through and start using this, so you don't inadvertently expose information or lose information that you weren't prepared for. Because you are 100% responsible for that. That's what the dark blue means. Customer is 100% responsible. Microsoft bears no responsibility for that information and data, or for your endpoint devices, or for your managing your IDs and passwords, including those guest accounts you might set up. So it's important to know what you're doing there and have it set up properly. So here's inside of Teams, there are things that you want to be thinking about. There's securities and settings, permissions, who has access to what documents. What can you do with team meetings? In team meetings, there's an option to record them. Do you want everybody to be able to record the meeting, or just certain people? Guest access, who can access it and how? You've got your data backup. Microsoft does some level of backup on your team's information, but it doesn't back it up all indefinitely. So, how are you backing up the information? Those chats that you have might now become very critical business information. How is that being backed up? Sprawl, meaning, if you have it set up that anyone can go create teams and channels, you may want to do that as an organizational policy, but you may end up with lots of teams set up and lots of channels set up, and they're not coordinated, and now suddenly you've got data everywhere. And that can be confusing, that can be less secure, that can cause challenges. Microsoft has now artificial intelligence built into everything, like every other app does these days with their Copilot. Do you want people to be able to create transcriptions or see transcriptions? I mentioned recordings. So again, as you're doing this, it's pretty easy to get yourself into trouble if you're not planning for this. So again, depending on how you're going to be using it, you want to be worried about that security and settings so that it's being used in properly the way you want it to go. I mentioned artificial intelligence. Microsoft has Copilot. We just did a webinar recently on Copilot, artificial intelligence that Microsoft has with their chat, GPT-like application. and other things that it does. It does some pretty cool things when you buy the actual Copilot license and add it to your Microsoft and Teams environment. You don't always get this Copilot piece, you get some basic parts. But when you have it this way, it's actually pretty powerful. So we were using it recently in a meeting, and I was having the meeting transcribed with Teams, and Copilot was enabled for me. And you can, if you look at these prompts down at the bottom, right below that example, you can say, catch me up on the meeting. What did I miss? You can ask it questions. You can say, what are the follow-ups from the meeting? What are those action items? If you go in and you've got Copilot, you can say, catch up on the meeting, and it'll create a summary of what has been talked about in the meeting so far and create a list of action items, including, things you might have talked about, like follow-up questions and that. And it's smart enough to filter out the chatter. We were in a meeting the other day and we were using this and we were talking about a project, and there was some chit chat going on about, I don't know, cats or dogs or the weather. That was not included in the follow-up it was included in the transcription, but in terms of the summary notes that Copilot created, it filtered out all of that idle chit chat. When there was a few minutes left in the meeting, Copilot prompted me and said, there's a few minutes left in your meeting. Here's some follow-up questions that haven't been answered yet that you started talking about in the meeting. So it's really powerful for that. And, it's pretty interesting to see how that works. And if you're the note taker for the meeting, you might find this to be a real handy feature. If you're the note taker, create the follow-up notes in that, it's very powerful and it's built in. And again, you may not want everybody to have this. You may want to have some security considerations around how you use Copilot, but it's all built in now. You're seeing that little Copilot logo everywhere in Microsoft products. And like I said, every application now seems to have their own AI built into it. But if you're interested more in AI, you want to talk more about that or Copilot, check out our last webinar, or invite us in for a conversation on that. But when you integrate the two, it's immensely powerful. It's like you've added on, an assistant here that is going to help you in many, many ways. So you get the Copilot piece when you do that, if you add on that license. Same thing within channels. When you're going back and forth, it automatically created a summary at the top. These are the key takeaways. But then on the right side where the Copilot prompt is, it was asked, please elaborate on the first point in the summary. And it went ahead and did it. It took the information from what was being talked about in the chat and put all that together for you. So, your mileage may vary with that. Every time you do anything in any of these AIs, they say, check it for accuracy, make sure it's correct. But this will probably do 80% of what you want, and then you're just doing a final review. It's probably going to catch a lot of what you want and maybe even some things you might have missed. So you might want to do a pilot with Copilot to try that out and see if that's going to really help you stay on top of things, make short work. It's also really useful if you were away from the chat for a while. If you've, like this person said, we've been you could be in a chat and then you left for vacation and you came back, you could say, catch me up. And it'll go back. Instead of having to read through every chat, Copilot will go through the chat and summarize what you might have missed for you. So it's a very powerful add-on. I talked about Microsoft Teams as a platform. So like every platform, you have apps, right? On your phone, you have apps, the App Store, the Google Play Store, the Windows Store, and all of that. There are apps that work inside of Microsoft Teams. And there's some that are developed by Microsoft, but you've also got them with third parties. So if you are, if you use Jira or Slack or MailChimp or any of these other applications, you may find integrations that work with inside of Teams to pull data in to interact with those applications. So if you go in and you click on the apps button inside of Teams down in the lower left, you'll get a list of all the different apps that are available. Now, again, this may be a place where you want to control on security. Do you want everybody to install apps? Do you only want certain users to be able to install apps? Do you want to control what apps people are using? It's a security concern because they might install apps that you don't necessarily want them to do. A lot of your computers are locked down so people can't just go and install software automatically. You may want to restrict what can be done in Microsoft Teams for some of those same reasons. These are the ones that Microsoft includes. So it's got something on loop components, which if you've been to any of our Hidden Gems webinars, you might remember something about loop, which is a pretty cool feature. It's got the OneNote app, the Wiki app. I'm gonna cover a couple of these here. It's just kind of the little gems inside of it. But these other apps you might use if you're using the Bookings app. If you haven't seen our Microsoft Hidden Gems webinar, look for that on our YouTube channel. We talk about a lot of these features and high level of what these are and why you might want to use them. But, they all work inside of Microsoft Teams. If you're using Power BI for dashboards and information, you can actually see all of that inside of Teams. So I'm going to cover a couple of the apps that I think might be interesting. I still love loop components. And I think it's a really underutilized feature of Microsoft. So I'm promoting it. So what is a loop? A loop is a little bit of something. So if you think inside of Microsoft Word, for example, you might go inside of Microsoft Word and create a table. That's a pretty common thing. What you can also do inside of Microsoft Word or inside of Teams is you can create that table. In this case, you can see this afternoon session table in the middle as what's called a loop. And that loop is a special type of document inside of Microsoft 365. And anywhere you link that loop, it will show up as this table with the permissions that are available to it. So you could be, in this case, preparing for the Alexandria launch, and you can see the different fields that are in this table. You can see the people that are inside that table and what they're doing. But you also get a link to that loop. So anywhere you use that link, it will always take you back to the loop. And loops, like other documents, are not stored in Teams. It's a separate document, but it can be referenced and viewed inside of Teams. It's immensely powerful. So if you start working with this in Teams, and then you want to then share it inside a document with somebody, you can copy the link loop, put it into your Word doc or into a spreadsheet or into an email. And when they see that, they will see the loop inside of the email or a link to get to it. So instead of having this copy of a copy of a copy of these things and who's got the current table or the current bullet list or whatever that is, you can share it as a loop. It's a little conceptual here. Take a look at one of our demos on it or bring us in for a conversation because believe me, this can be a real big time saver for people just trying to find and having the most current information. So you do get loop components. A lot of people, we saw in the survey are using meetings, right? You're just doing meetings inside of Teams for inside your team or outside with people. And, if you're like me, you've got a lot of meetings. So there's actually a Meet app that you can add. And when you do that, it'll help you organize and see all the meetings you have coming up. It'll show you who's in those meetings. And you can also reference the files that might be necessary for those meetings. So if you look, you can see that first one, there's the agenda. That's a OneNote notebook that's got the agenda for that Sales Weekly stand-up meeting. For the next meeting with Daniela and Cassandra, you can see it's got that sales analysis template attachment to it, or what's really a reference to what's in SharePoint. So if you've got a lot of meetings, you want to see what's coming up, where they are, what you might have missed. You can see at the bottom, it'll sort them by recent ones. You can see the meetings you missed, any recordings that were done, any app mentions. So if you've got a lot of meetings, this is a kind of a cool place to look. You can start a new meeting from here as well, but it's another place to just organize all of those meetings. When you can see those meetings on your calendar, but you're only going to see, if you've got one meeting in the week on your calendar, you're just going to see that one meeting. Here you would see all of those meetings regardless of when they're happening. So that's a cool app built into Teams. You just got to go add it. Microsoft has what's called Teams Phone. So in addition to the voice and video chatting, you can actually use it as a traditional phone system. Your mileage may vary with this. We have some clients that use Microsoft Teams Phone. They love it, never had an issue. We have some that have had challenges with it and are looking to migrate away from it. So it may work for you, it may not. It's something to look at, but it's built, it's another feature. So for some people, they're replacing their old phone system and they're moving to a Microsoft Teams phone. And just like Teams being available on every device, you can have a handset at your desktop, but you can also see it on your computer or on your smartphone and make and receive calls. You can get dedicated phone numbers to it. You can port your main line over to it so it works just like a regular phone system. So that's an add-on to your basic Microsoft Teams. There's add-on licenses for Teams. There's a whole lot of detail here. When we're done with this webinar, you'll have an opportunity to and a request to fill out a survey on how I did, and you'll also get a link to this so you don't have to bury yourself too much in this one. The one I highlighted in orange here, this audio conferencing, that's one a lot of people are adding on. If you want to do a Teams meeting with somebody that's outside your organization, you don't need any special licensing for that. However, if you want them to be able to do a call in from their phone with a phone number, because sometimes people don't have good Wi-Fi or they don't have Teams or for whatever variety of reasons, you see it a lot with Zoom. This is kind of that similar feature. If you have the audio conferencing add-on, you will then be able to automatically create a phone number for people to dial into. So some people add that into. But if you want to replace it for your whole phone system, there's all kinds of different licensings and things you can add on to it. The walkie-talkie feature. This is pretty cool. So the walkie-talkie app you can add. So right now, if you think about traditionally when you call people in Teams or anything like that, you are making a call and receiving a call. But in some cases, you want that walkie-talkie feature. And I'm trying to remember that old phone service back in the 90s that was there, did and they had the walkie-talkie feature that people loved. This allows you to use that. So you think about where could you use something like this? You could have a Teams channel set up for the warehouse. And the warehouse people, you don't want to have them have to answer a call. You might just want to say, hey, Johnny, are you there? You can click and use the walkie-talkie feature. They can respond, yep, here I am. And you can just go back and forth without having to make a call. You do that instant kind of walkie-talkie piece. And you can actually have it with multiple channels for up to 5. And you can listen in on multiple channels. So if you are, if you've got a channel set up for security and one for the warehouse and one for the shipping area, one for the driver on the road kind of a thing, and you want to listen into all those kind of chats going on and know that those are all available, you can have that. So you can actually have multi listening on that. And then when you want to chat, you can go back or do the walkie-talkie feature. You can go back and forth on that. And if you don't want to be listening, you can just say stop listening if someone's on break or doesn't, it's after hours or something like that. So kind of a cool feature if you've got those people that are running around a lot, and rather than having to answer calls to find out what you're talking about, you can just say, hey, Bill, got a minute? Need to talk to you about this project. Or, hey, Stephanie in shipping, did that package go out? And they can just hit, yep, went out. Great, thanks. So a lot faster, a lot less having to worry about answering calls and responding that way. So action plan. We got just a few seconds left here. This is really important. So this might have been drinking like a fire hose for some of you. And I know for some of you, you want to see a demo on how these things work. And for some of these features, you could spend an hour just talking about the intricacies of chat and email and things like that. This stuff is complex and there's different ways to do it. So, but you want it done right. You want to begin with the end in mind. A stitch in time saves 9, and time is money. But the worst thing is when you spend time on this and then people don't use it because you didn't do it in a way that actually worked for people. So we recommend invite us in for a conversation about really what you want to accomplish. I mean, you can start playing around with it, but again, you might start down a road that is not going to lead you to where you really want to end up. So you want to begin with that end in mind. You might be changing around some business process as part of this. What do people hate worse than IT sometimes is change. And there's a whole world of just getting people used to how are they going to use this, that it's coming, that they're not scared of it, that they're embracing it, that they're part of the team that's going to make it successful. IT projects fail all the time because people don't provide change management or they don't provide training. They just figure, oh, they'll figure it out, or this is easy because you got it in 5 minutes. Someone else that's been doing email back and forth and all that, now they're using Teams and they're maybe a little less savvy on this. They might need more time, a little more hand holding, either a group training, could be one-on-one with any people, and get up feedback from people on this. And really, from an action plan today, get out your calendars now and schedule that first action. If you want to spend more time on Teams, great, put that on your calendar. If you want to rewatch this video when it's available, put it on the calendar. If you want to invite us in, put it on your calendar when you're going to call us. But you want to get moving on this if you're going to use it. And an action starts with getting it out of your head and getting it out into the world, into your calendar, into communicating about it with somebody so that you can actually make the difference you want to see it made with Teams. And that's it. So we're a minute and a half over. Sorry about that. I will stick around for another minute or two if you've got some questions. Otherwise, you are going to get a request for a survey of how we did, what you'd like to see, maybe what you'd like to see in a future webinar, as well as a link to the video and PowerPoint slides. So let's see, any questions? I see David's got a question. Can you transfer existing email into Teams? I'm not sure exactly what you mean with that. You do get a shared email box where you can move email to, and you can certainly copy emails over into Teams. But if you're looking to have a whole, we'd have to find out more about what you're looking to see with that, what you mean the addresses. Any other questions on there? So you want to move away from Outlook. The one thing you don't necessarily do from Teams is the actual emailing from. So if you want to move away from Outlook, what that means for you, and maybe you don't like the Outlook application, you can use Outlook on the web, which for a lot of people, they like that. There are other email applications that integrate with Outlook, but the real sending and things like that, you still end up going, when you actually try and send an email from Teams, it actually launches Outlook for you, unless you've got some other background mechanism of automation that responds to emails and things like that. So if you want to totally move away, I'd like to hear more about what's your concerns are around that. And that might be a good topic for a short meeting. But you still need Outlook you still need that inbox for yourself and that calendar for yourself, and that all happens with Outlook. Sounds good. You're welcome, Shelley or Shell. Any other questions? Okay, I see people starting to drop off. If you want to have a private conversation, again, reach out, let us know. We may follow up with you if you're new here to see how we can help you. And otherwise, hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday and a wonderful Memorial Day weekend coming up. Hope you get some good time and we have some good weather and you have a great weekend. Otherwise, we'll see you at our next webinar. I think we're doing one in June, and then I think we do a little bit of a break there on some of that, and then we'll see you at the next webinar.